So next, what I want to talk about is how did I learn to do what I do? To be totally honest, most of it was trial and error, straight up trial and error. I began training in martial arts when I was 12 years old. I started in an American style karate, and I did it for a short period of time, and I instantly realized that that was not what I was looking for. I had no interest in katas. I had no interest in the formalities of class. I had no interest in the robotic, non-practical things that I was being taught for me. I'm not saying that that's the way everybody is or that that's the way the styles are. I'm just saying for me that was how it started. But I did maintain it long enough to realize that's not what I was looking for. And even at 12 years old, I had a sense of what I was trying to find. And believe me, at 12 years old, I was a completely different person than I am now. I was, honestly, up until my 20s, my early 20s, I was extremely passive. I was very shy. I was very backward, inverted. I had no social skills whatsoever. I was a mess. I was a complete mess. And even then, I realized something inside of me told me that's not what you're looking for. You need to keep looking. So I listened to that voice, and I continued to look. In early 1980s, early mid 1980s, I found the Way of the Warrior Dojo, and that changed my life, and I don't say that lightly. As far as martial arts is concerned, it was an epiphany. It was an enlightening. I just don't know what words to use for what happened to me. It was as if I didn't exist prior to that. And when I found that, I woke up, or even better, I was born. Before that, I was just wandering around an empty shell, not knowing what I was, who I was, what I was looking for. When I found that dojo, it was just like boom, I don't know how else to explain it. But the instructor, the head instructor, his name was James, and he actually was a friend of my younger brother. And my younger brother decided he was going to take classes up there, and they taught a Shorin-ryu style martial art, Shorin-ryu Matsumura style karate, which our town, honestly, that's back in the 80s, that was the only thing you could find for the most part, was Matsumura style Shorin-ryu. And so I started, they asked me to come up and start training with them. And I had already known that system, that general style, that general way of doing things was not what I was looking for. But I wasn't finding anything else. So I agreed that I would go up there and I would start taking classes. And it was presented to me, this is how it was presented to me. All right, it wasn't what I was looking for, and they understood that. The owner of the dojo competed in PKC tournaments, and for those of you who know martial arts and martial art tournaments, you obviously know what the PKC is. So anyway, he did PKC tournaments and USKK, United States Karate Do-Kai. So he did the Professional Karate Association and the United States Karate Do-Kai tournaments. And he would go every weekend, would go to tournaments. There wasn't a weekend for years that he did not go to these tournaments. He was basically chasing points, and if you don't understand what that means, it's basically he was going to as many tournaments as he could, and he was trying to get as many points by wins that he could to be rated and ranked amongst their fighters. And when I say fighters, I probably shouldn't use that word, because I do not in any way, shape, or form constitute somebody who fights in a karate tournament a fighter. They do point tournaments, and at best it's tag to me. At best, that's what it is. So, but I will use that word, but it does not imply what most people would consider to be a fighter, at least not me personally. So anyway, he said that as a dojo, the more students he had going to these tournaments, the higher ranked he would get, and he wanted his dojo to be ranked really high in the PKC and the USKK. So I agreed to train with him and to go to these tournaments. Now, there's many different aspects to these tournaments. They do weapons, they do kata, and they do kumite, which is basically point fighting or tag. They do more than that, but that's the general idea of it. And they do have sections to do self-defense techniques and demonstrations. The self-defense techniques are, well, we'll try to leave my personal opinions of all this stuff out. It's not going to help the situation. So anyway, I agreed to train at his dojo and to do the tournaments. But the stipulation was that I was not going to do katas in any shape or form, weapon or empty hand, but I would be more than glad to do the kumite and try to get his dojo ranked higher with that. And it was agreed, okay, that's cool. So I began training, and I went to a few tournaments, and I sucked. Let's just be blunt. I sucked. It was horrible. I still have a good amount, not a lot, but a good amount of the tournaments from probably 1990, 90-91 season. I still have the majority of those on DVD. Originally, of course, they were on VHS tape, and then I transferred them to DVD. I will never show those to anybody. No, you don't want to see that stuff. But anyway, I wasn't really good at it, and I'll admit that. But I was winning consistently. As well, my brother was competing, and he was winning consistently. Now, he was good at it. Now, my brother and I have completely 180-degree differences with most of everything in our lives. Although he was into martial arts and I was into martial arts, they were different types of martial arts. He really loved the tappy-tappy tournament-style karate stuff, and he was really good at it. Me, I didn't care for it. I did it to help the dojo, and I sucked. So anyway, he was winning, I was winning. He and I only competed against each other one time, and he obviously easily handled me. But most of the time, he would come in first place, and I would come in second place, or I would come in first place, and he would come in second place. So for the 1990-91 PKC karate tournaments, my brother and I ruled our division, basically, without doubt. I do not recall any tournament that whole year that I did not win either first or second place, and vice versa. He did not win either first or second place. So we basically dominated that division. So he had one more tournament than I did. And of course he took first place in that tournament, and that gave him 11 points for the first place, and he beat me out on the state championship by, guess what, 11 points. So he was the first in state, and I was the runner-up in state that year for something I didn't even like or was good at. So anyway, during the Shorin-ryu, the Matsumura style classes, it was brought to my attention that James was going down to Indianapolis and training with a guy named Bruce Ogle. And Bruce Ogle was teaching him Filipino sword and stick art called Kali. And some of you may know it also as Eskrima. Kali Eskrima, it's sword and stick fighting. So he knew I was interested, and he began teaching. He would go take classes from Bruce, and then he would come back and he would teach what he was training there to me and a few other students at that dojo. So that was my awakening, beginning my training in Kali, Arnis, Eskrima. That was my awakening. I loved it. I had a passion for it. I saw it as the first honest, realistic, effective martial art that I had ever seen in my life. And I dedicated many, many years to training in that system. Now, in 1986, I graduated high school. I left and I went to Florida. 1988, I came back from Florida and I continued my training in Arnis, Kali, Eskrima with James. Now, at this point, not only was he extremely skilled in that art, but he had always had a desire for ninjutsu, and he wanted to learn ninjutsu. And he had began searching someone out to train in that system. And also, a few years later, 1992, I would join the military, and then I would leave. So in '92, I went into the Army, and I was stationed in Fort Bragg, and I began training with a lot of the soldiers there. I was asked to go through their combat arms class and become a combat arms instructor. And I turned that down immediately because what they were teaching at the time was called Sikaran, which was based off of a Filipino kicking art, and from what I understand, Shotokan karate. Needless to say, though, in my opinion, it was not effective. It wasn't practical, and I didn't like it. So I said no. I said, I'll do it if you let me teach what I want to teach, but of course it's the military and you never get to do what you want to do. So I did turn them down. Towards the end of my military career, the UFC had just got started. I remember watching the very first UFC in the barracks. And I turned to those guys and I pointed to that screen, and I will never forget this as long as I live. I looked at those guys and I said, that is what I want to do. That is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that. Guys looked at me and they said, yep, I could see you doing that. I could see you doing that. So 1995, September 9th, 1995, I get out of the Army. November, is it 25th, 18th, 25th, somewhere around there. I start my first dojo here in town. and then I began working with whoever I can find to train with. I immediately pick up training my collie. James is still around, but at this point in time, he has moved on to ninjutsu. He has a family, career, and he lives down in Indianapolis. So my connection with him, although it was not severed, it was stretched. But I still continue to work, primarily work with the collie concepts and ideas. Although by this time, I've amassed a few other interesting systems and styles that I started to work with, but nothing like, the collie and Eskrima still. Now, shortly after that, I find the Animal House. Now, the Animal House was a fledgling MMA competition team that was started here in my town, and I immediately joined up with them. These guys had been around for a few years together. They had been around for a few years, and I don't know if you guys know or remember, but in the very, very early stages of MMA, they used to hold illegal MMA contests before it became legalized. They would hold them in warehouses and things of that nature. And that stuff really happened. And these guys were the ones that had started these illegal warehouse fights in my town. And I got hooked up with them and started training with them. Now, by the time I started training with them, they had evolved past, just barely, but they had evolved past the hiding out in warehouses and fighting and training. They actually started getting into dojos. And this was when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA just started getting started in the United States. So I trained with them, and these guys were beating the dog crap out of me. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. I had nothing on the ground. These guys were just beating the dog crap out of me. I trained with them for a good 3-6 months, not seeing any advancement in my skills whatsoever. And I brought it to the attention of the head instructor. I said, listen, man, I said, I don't know what it is. I said, I'm not learning anything. I'm not getting any better. And he looked at me, and this is another one of those things I'll never forget. He looked at me, and he not just smiled, but he actually laughed. He chuckled. And he said, dude, you have no idea. He said, you're getting so much better. He said, you don't even realize how good you are right now. I said, I don't see it, man. I said, these guys are beating me up. And he said, well, yeah, they're beating you up. He said, these guys have been doing it for years now. I said, you just got started. He said, believe me. He said, we start getting some new students in here. He says, you're going to see how good you are. And sure enough, just a few months later, we started getting a good flow of students in. And I mean, I was just tearing these guys up. And I didn't even know why I was tearing them up. I was doing the same thing that I was doing with these other guys. And they were whomping me. But these new guys, I was just like, if their level, their level was, say, here, mine was here. And I didn't understand at the time. I'm like, I just didn't realize how proficient I had gotten. So that really gave me a boost. And those years that I spent with Animal House, I worked out and trained hard. And most people in martial arts don't even realize what I mean when I say hard. Now I'm talking about dojo martial arts, okay? Dojo martial artists have no idea what I'm talking about. I'll give you a small example. What I mean by training hard is, first of all, I trained 5 or 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, religiously. Religiously. There was nothing that stopped me from going up to that dojo and training. 5 or 6 hours a day, religiously, 7 days a week. Work didn't stop me. Family didn't stop me. Nothing. Weather didn't stop me. There wasn't anything that kept me from doing that. Now, I have to say, I had a fantastic job that I was pretty much my own boss, so I could come and go as I pleased. I made my own schedule, so my schedule worked around my training. And my family, being my wife and kids, my wife was extremely dedicated to my dedication of training. So there was no issues there either. As a matter of fact, my wife helped train me. She was in the dojos enough to know what was going on, and she actually became a very important and trusted trainer in my skills, as well as my corner person when I fought. She was in the corner of all of my fights. I did not fight without her being in my corner. So anyway, what I mean by dedication, other than that, was the training. Now, when I did Kali, I was in my early 20s. When I started doing mixed martial arts, I was in my early 30s. So there's a difference in age there. But when I did Kali, we didn't just work technique, boom, boom in thin air. We had sticks. We used sticks. And I'm not talking about, we started with padded sticks, but we would use regular sticks. And what we would use back in the day was broom handles, old broom mop handles. We'd find them in the trash no matter where we found them. We'd take them out, we'd saw them to length, and we used wooden sticks. And we would hit. I mean, we're not just like, wow, nothing like that. But we would hit you, boom, you'd feel it. And I would go home every night with bruises and red marks up and down my arms, legs. Sometimes I'd get hit in the face, but bruises and red marks up and down my arms every night. That conditioned me. Believe me, that conditioned me. People don't have that dedication anymore. You can say, well, you can learn it without that. I suppose you could. My personal belief is you may be able to learn it, but I guarantee you're not going to learn it as well. You're not going to understand certain things without getting hit. So we go from that mentality, which I kept all of my martial arts. Within all of my martial arts, I kept that mentality. So then, now we jump into the MMA section of my life. And now I'm in my early mid-30s. And I'm still in fantastic shape. Still in fantastic shape at that time. I will have to say that if I were to give you an age range as far as my perfect and peak physical condition was 25, which is when I joined the Army, to 35, which is when I was still in the peak of my fighting career. So from the age of 25 to 35, I was in the best physical condition of my life. But with the MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in particular, I trained with these guys. And when I say training, I mean training. I would train 5 or 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, religiously. And every class, I would either be bruised, I would be bloodied, I would absolutely be exhausted, and many of the classes, especially in the very beginning, I would literally, and I'm not saying this figuratively, I mean literally, I would crawl off the mat, go over to a bucket, and I would vomit into that bucket. And immediately, I'd wipe my face off with a rag, throw it down. I would immediately crawl back onto that mat, and I would train for at least another 2 or 3 hours. Absolutely. That was my dedication. That was my training. And I have nothing but fond and wonderful memories of that. Absolutely. Now, I can say, now, I'm 51 years old. I still love the concepts of my Filipino Kali. I still incorporate that into everything I do. I love my MMA Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu aspects, which I still incorporate with everything I do. And now I have the Aikido, which I incorporate into everything I do, and I love it just as much, differently, but just as much as I do the MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu portion of my life and the Filipino Kali portion of my life. I just happen to be in the Aikido portion of my life. Now we're going to discuss the Aikido portion. So we've discussed the Kali, the beginning of my martial arts. We've discussed the finding and the attempt at being as best as I could with the Kali. Then finding the MMA and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the attempt at being as proficient as I could with that. And then towards the end of my MMA career, which was mid 2000s. 2005 was probably the very bottom end of that section of my life. The career was done. My dedicated, absolute dedication to training in MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was over at that point. Now, I did not just stop. What had happened, one, I was just getting too gosh darn old, and my body was just in a mess at that point, honestly. But in the early 2000s, while I'm still training MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and actually at one of the classes, a guy comes in to the dojo and talks with the owner of the dojo. And after class, I found out that this guy was going to teach a seminar for Aikido. Now, I had always, for some reason, had always been interested in Aikido. Part of me just didn't understand what it was because it was just different. It was very different. If you just watch Aikido and you don't understand what's going on, it does look questionably fake in certain aspects of it. And I'll admit that, without doubt. It does. But it was something that I was drawn to. Even, years and years I had been drawn to it, but I had never found anybody that had the skill to teach it. Or I had never even found anybody who had trained it. Even when I was in the Army, there was people who did Aikido I worked with, but they didn't really deal too much with the Aikido aspects when we worked out. So anyway, he says that they were going to hold a Aikido seminar, and the first thing I did was jump up off that mat, run into the office, and ask the owner if that was true, whether there was really going to be an Aikido seminar? And he said, yeah. I said, how much is it? He told me how much it was. I ran right to my wallet, grabbed that money out of my wallet, went right in there and handed it to him and said, I got to be a part of this. He said, okay. So that was actually my introduction to Aikido. I went to the seminar, which, by the way, I do have on DVD. I took the class, loved it, fell in love with it almost as much as I had fell in love with Kali the first time I seen it. The first time I had seen MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was one of those things. It was one of those things that I knew that was part of what I was looking for. And been training it ever since. I did phase out most of my, gradually phased out my MMA Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training. I don't believe that I'll ever phase out adding it to what I know and the way I work and the way I move. Of course, I'll never do that, but I definitely phased out of competing and that massive training that I put into it. I don't do that anymore. So I dedicated myself to Aikido. And I say for about the last 12, 15 years, I've been focusing mainly on my Aikido training. So that's where I'm at today. Although the Kali is still prominent in my footwork and my concepts and the way I like to do things, you can clearly see the MMA Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu aspects in what I do and how I do it if you're looking for it. But I have to say that right now, and probably for the most part, I will focus for the most part on my Aikido. Now, there was a short period of time when I was teaching we'll call it a mixed martial art. It was before the mixed martial art concept started, but I had culminated all of my stuff into a particular singleized art for myself. The aspects of the sticks, the aspects of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and this was actually before I had any real serious Aikido training. But once I had the Aikido training, I started throwing those concepts and skills in with it. So I've accumulated and developed basically a system of my own for me. I'm more than willing to teach it to anybody that wants to study it. As I say, I focus at this dojo here that I'm at right now. I only focus on Aikido. I will say that in the beginning, that's all I really desired to focus on. At this point, I only focus on the Aikido solely because I gave my word that I would not teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, mixed martial arts, or anything else. So there is a MMA instructor at this dojo that is not myself, and you can't have too many cooks spoil the stew. Too many chiefs, not enough Indians, that sort of thing. But I agreed when I came to this dojo that I would not start or teach an MMA class, and my word is my word, and I won't do it. I think if I had the opportunity and it was my dojo, it was mine, I would be more than enthusiastic about starting other classes. Definitely stick class based off of my kali. I would definitely want to do an MMA/Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class based off of what I've learned from that. And I definitely would do my Aikido class. And I would also hold classes that was somewhat of a culmination of all of that put together. And what I named, when I started my dojo in 1995, I named it the Zenshin Self-Defense Academy, which meant the way of the entire body. And when I did that, I really named my system Zenshin, the way of the entire body. Once I really got heavy into the MMA, I added Raptor fighting systems because my fight name was Raptor. And so I developed what I called Raptor fighting systems, which was basically my MMA aspects. Now that I teach Aikido, although I teach it here at the Citadel, I still maintain my Zenshin name. I call it Zenshin Aikido. And so I definitely keep that. But if I had enough of students in my way, yeah, I would teach individual classes in stick and knife, individual classes in MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I would teach individual classes in Aikido, but I would also teach classes that culminated all of those into one particular self-defense oriented, realistic class. So that's pretty much the history of me and my martial arts. So thank you for listening, and I hope I didn't bore too many people too quickly. So thank you for watching Bentley's Backwoods Bushcraft, and enjoy the outdoors, even if it's just your own backyard.